doing the right thing meant losing everything. Mark Wilson, a humble farmer in rural Montana, thought he was just helping a child in need when he found a boy stranded in a deadly blizzard. But what began as an act of kindness quickly spiraled into a battle for his home, his reputation, and his livelihood. With a foreclosure looming and his community turning against him, Mark had no idea that his decision would lead to a life-altering twist. But who is this mysterious child, and how will Mark's courage change everything? Keep watching to discover a story of sacrifice, redemption, and the unexpected consequences of doing what's right. Can you believe the courage it takes to do what's right, even when the world turns against you? Let's dive into the heart-wrenching story of Mark Wilson, a 44-year-old wheat farmer in the vast, unforgiving plains of rural Montana. 3 years ago, he lost his wife, leaving him to raise his 10-year-old son, Jason, alone on land that had been in his family for generations. But this winter? Oh, it was brutal. An early frost wiped out half his crop, and then, as if that wasn't enough, equipment breakdowns drained every last penny of his savings. The bank's third warning letter hit like a sledgehammer. Foreclosure was looming, just 14 days away. On a bone-chilling afternoon, with snow falling like a curtain, Mark was out mending fences when he saw movement at the forest's edge. A tiny figure stumbling through the trees, barely visible in the blizzard. Who could be out in this storm? Drawing closer, his heart sank. It was a boy no more than 7, alone, his clothes torn to shreds, his face streaked with dirt and tears. "What's your name, kid?" Mark asked, but the boy just stared, eyes wide with fear. "You're freezing," Mark exclaimed, ripping off his own coat to wrap around the child's trembling shoulders. "Come on, let's get you warm." Without hesitation, he scooped the boy up and carried him to the farmhouse. Inside, Mark stoked the wood stove until it roared, whipped up a steaming bowl of soup, and made a cozy bed right next to Jason's. The two boys eyed each other warily at first, but Jason, bless his heart, offered his spare pajamas and his favorite stuffed bear. "Don't worry, we'll find your folks tomorrow," Mark promised as the boy drifted off, exhaustion finally overtaking his fear. Can you imagine the relief that child must have felt, safe at last? At dawn, Mark called the sheriff's office, but when Deputy Collins showed up 2 hours later, suspicion clouded his face. "You found him last night and only called us now?" he asked, his pen hovering over his notepad. "Why the delay, Wilson?" "It was pitch dark, the roads were a death trap, and the kid was hypothermic," Mark shot back. He needed warmth and food, not a freezing ride through a blizzard. The deputy snapped photos of the boy, who hadn't uttered a single word. His radio crackled. No missing children matched the description. "We're taking him in for evaluation," Collins said coldly, "and I need your full statement by this afternoon." But the town of Millwood, they'd already started whispering, "That weird Wilson guy's got a kid on his property." Hissed. "Always been strange since his wife died. Probably can't even handle his own son." The next day, a bank representative flanked by the sheriff showed up with crushing news. "Mr. Wilson, given recent events and your loan status, we're fast-tracking the foreclosure. Your presence here is a community concern." "Community concern?" Mark's voice cracked with disbelief. "I saved a child who would have frozen to death out there. That's for the authorities to decide," the banker replied, ice in his tone. "You've got 72 hours to vacate." Mark stood in his yard, watching helplessly as the boy was driven away in a county vehicle. Why didn't anyone ask why he'd taken the child in? All they saw was a struggling farmer, too isolated, too quiet, a perfect scapegoat. Jason tugged at his hand, his voice small. "Dad, why are they mad at you for helping?" Mark's heart broke. He had no answer. Millwood turned on him like a pack of wolves. The hardware store suddenly had no supplies for Mark. The diner, no tables when he and Jason walked in for lunch. Even the school principal had the nerve to suggest Jason stay home until things are clarified. A neighbor, Frank, who'd borrowed Mark's tractor just last harvest, crossed the street to avoid him. "Frank," Mark called out, desperate. "You know me. I've lived here my whole life." "I did what anyone would have done." Frank stared at his boots. "Maybe you should have just called it in, Mark. Left it to the professionals." "What? And let a child freeze waiting 40 minutes for help in a blizzard?" Frank walked away, leaving Mark's words hanging in the air. The boy, named Eli in the papers, was sent to Horizon Children's Center 2 counties away. No family claimed him. He stayed silent, speaking only through nods and shakes of his head. A week later, the center reported him missing. The Millwood Gazette's headline screamed, "Child previously held at suspicious farm, now missing again." The accusation was clear as day. Mark was hauled in for more questioning. In the sheriff's office, he kept his hands folded, though anger burned inside. "I found a kid alone in freezing conditions and brought him to safety," he said, exhausted from repeating himself. "I fed him, kept him warm, and called you at the first safe moment. That's it." Then why'd he run from proper care? The detective pressed. "Maybe because he was terrified," Mark snapped. "Strangers tore him from the only place he felt safe, since whatever happened in those woods." But his words, they fell on deaf ears. All they saw was a desperate man clinging to land he couldn't afford. With 1 day left before eviction, Mark and Jason slept in the barn, the house packed, electricity cut off. They huddled under wool blankets, warmed only by the livestock nearby. "Dad," Jason whispered, "will we ever come back home?" Mark stroked his son's hair, choking back the truth. "I don't know, buddy. It's not fair," Jason cried. "You helped that boy. You always said helping's the right thing." "It is, Jason," Mark said, his voice thick. "Always, even when it costs you everything. Even if it costs our farm." He swallowed hard. Even before dawn, a sound jolted Mark awake, footsteps crunching on frosted grass, then fading fast. Cautiously, he opened the barn door and found an envelope on the ground. Inside, a note. "Thank you for saving my nephew's life. We can't come forward yet, but you're not alone. Help is coming." Unsigned, the handwriting was precise, unfamiliar. Was it a cruel prank? A real promise? Mark read it twice, tucking it into his pocket, the careful penmanship giving him a flicker of hope. That morning, as he loaded their last belongings into the pickup, Mark noticed neighbors peeking from behind curtains. Not with hate, but could it be shame? Not one had helped. Not one had defended him. This community, where his family had farmed for 3 generations, had abandoned him at the first rumor. Jason climbed into the truck, clutching his backpack of treasure. Mark took one last look at the farm, the fields where he taught Jason to ride a bike, the apple tree his wife planted, the soil holding decades of family footprints. "Time to go, son," he whispered, his voice breaking. But then at the first light of dawn, what was that sound? Engine. Not just any engines, but the deep rumble of military vehicles. Mark stepped out of the barn, where they'd spent their final night, and saw dust clouds rising down the access road. 6 camouflage jeeps roared through the gate, forming a tight semicircle around the barnyard. Their insignia. Nothing Mark recognized. Not army, not National Guard. Neighbors spilled out of their homes, gawking. The sheriff arrived, looking as baffled as anyone. What on earth was happening? Mark stood frozen in front of the barn door, his heart pounding. Would they arrest him, harm him? His son Jason was still asleep inside, unaware of the chaos unfolding. 6 military jeeps had just roared onto his farm, and now a man in tactical gear stepped out of the lead vehicle. No rank on his uniform, but his presence screamed authority. He marched straight toward Mark, ignoring the curious neighbors gathering in the distance. "Mr. Wilson, I'm Commander Hayes," he said firmly. "We're here to ensure your safety." What did that even mean? Before Mark could wrap his head around those words, another jeep door swung open. Out jumped a small figure. Eli, the boy he'd saved from the blizzard. Can you imagine the shock? Following him was a tall man in civilian clothes, his sharp eyes scanning every corner like a hawk. "I don't understand," Mark stammered, his mind racing. Commander Hayes leaned in, his voice low and urgent. "The child you found, he's Elias Thornton, son of Special Agent Robert Thornton, one of our top undercover operatives, battling an international weapons trafficking ring." The man in civilian clothes, Agent Thornton, no doubt stepped forward, keeping Eli close. His voice trembled as he spoke. "3 weeks ago our safe house was hit. In the chaos I lost Eli. I thought he was gone forever." He paused, his stoic facade cracking. "Until you, Mark, proved he was alive. How could one act of kindness unravel such a story? Why didn't you come for him sooner?" Mark asked, his voice edged with frustration. "The mission's still active," Thornton replied, his tone heavy. Going public would have risked countless lives and years of work infiltrating that network. Hayes chimed in, his words cutting through the cold morning air. Your actions saved this boy's life, but they also put a target on your back. The people hunting Thornton would have come for anyone who knew too much. So you just let me lose everything. Mark's voice broke, bitterness spilling out. His farm, his home, gone because he did the right thing? No, Thornton said, his eyes fierce. We've been watching. Plant the suspicion, the loneliness you've faced. That's the price of kindness in a world that doesn't always see it. But we don't abandon those who protect our own. Hayes gestured to the soldiers now fanning out around the farm. As of 0600 hours today, this property is a military safe house. The foreclosure, suspended, pending a national security review. A female officer approached, handing Mark documents stamped with official seals. Your financial burdens, they're covered by a confidential compensation package for your service to national security. Could this really be happening? Mark stood speechless as Jason stumbled out of the barn, rubbing his eyes, awestruck by the soldiers. Eli broke free from his father and ran to Jason, flashing the first real smile since his rescue. Sheriff Davis pushed through the crowd, demanding answers, but Hayes shut him down smoothly. Sheriff, this is federal now. We'll brief the press at noon to clear up the lies about Mr. Wilson. By midday, Mark's kitchen buzzed with military radios, and news vans lined the property's edge. A statement hit the airwaves. Mark Wilson, an ordinary farmer, had heroically aided a federal operation, sacrificing everything for a child's life. Overnight, the story flipped. TV screens showed Mark's security footage, him trudging through the blizzard, carrying a half-frozen Eli to safety. Neighbors who'd shunned him, suddenly, they swore they'd never doubted him. Hypocrites. That evening, as soldiers patrolled the farm, Agent Thornton found Mark alone on his porch. My son hasn't spoken since the attack, Thornton said softly. The trauma stole his voice, but this morning, he spoke. Want to know his first words? Is the farmer safe? Thornton's voice cracked. He remembered you carrying him through the snow, giving him Jason's clothes, letting him sleep by the fire, without pressing him to talk. That's why I fought to save your farm. Some debts can't be repaid. As night fell, townsfolk crept to the farm's gate, leaving flowers and scribbled apologies. Their shame was palpable, but the soldiers turned them away. Eli approached Mark, his small hand slipping into the farm. You saved me, he said, his voice deliberate, like he was rediscovering words. Dad says you're a hero. Mark knelt down, meeting Eli's eyes. I'm just a farmer who did what was right, kid. Anyone would have. But they didn't, Eli said with a child's piercing clarity. You did. A month later, the farm was unrecognizable. The military had scaled back, but their presence left behind miracles. Fixed equipment, a stronger barn, new irrigation systems, the bank loan, wiped clean by a so-called agricultural grant. Everyone knew was government hush money. Mark wasn't rich, but his life still revolved around the simple rhythm of planting and harvesting, dawn chores and quiet evenings. Each morning, he rode out to the fields with Jason and Eli, now his foster son, while Thornton finished his mission. The town transformed. Farmers who'd stubbed Mark now welcomed him to Sunday dinners. The school principal apologized to Jason in person for her coldness. Even Frank, the neighbor who dodged Mark, showed up with his boys to fix fences. No questions asked. One morning, a wooden sign appeared at the farm's entrance, where one father chose courage over fear. Mark let it stand, a quiet testament. Thornton visited when he could, always under tight security. One day, he found Mark checking wheat seedlings in the field he'd nearly lost. The operation wraps up next month, Thornton said. I'm requesting a desk job after. Eli needs stability. He'll miss you when we leave. Mark nodded, but Thornton paused, gazing at the horizon. Actually, I was hoping Eli could stay here part-time. He's healing with you, Mark. We both are. Could Mark's kindness have forged such a bond? That evening, as fireflies danced in the fields and the boys chased them through the dusk, Mark sat on his porch. The farm he'd almost lost thrummed with new life. The community that betrayed him now held him up as a hero. But Mark, he didn't feel special. He just refused to ignore a suffering child when he could help, no matter the cost. If that set him apart, maybe the problem wasn't him but a world where compassion felt extraordinary. The world can turn its back, But justice, it comes when you cling to what's right. Mark never aimed to be a hero, yet his choice rippled across a nation. I won't let him die out there, he'd vowed, plunging into the snowstorm, boots sinking into frozen mud, chasing a child's cries in the forest. No one knew who the boy was, but Mark brought him home, kept him warm. The next day, the bank foreclosed. He lost it all, but at dawn, 6 jeeps roared in, their engines shattering the silence. Kindness, it's never wasted.